Hi, everyone. Rivkaleah here. How is everyone doing this week? I'm starting this a couple minutes late, so hopefully people can jump right in. I have a lot of notes, so I'm going to be reading a little bit tonight. Um, Again, welcome. I'm glad that everybody is here. I am not a doctor, not a therapist or a counselor. I talk from my own experiences or experiences from my close friends and family. And tonight I wanted to talk about um, attachment styles. And this kind of goes along with what the collective is all about. And people coming through trauma from all different areas, all different types of trauma. And with trauma, attachment styles can form and or change. So the main attachment styles that you're going to hear about are secure, avoidant dismissive, fearful avoidant, and anxious preoccupied. And the majority of people fall into one of those categories, but some of them can kind of be combined a little bit. And again, they can change throughout your life. So, attachment styles typically, based when they were first developed or first talked about, they talked about them developing from early childhood and in your upbringing. So, again, that's where they would typically start, but then they can change throughout your life depending on significant life events. And then you can kind of reevaluate, change, if you've gotten therapy, counseling, that type of thing, any type of personal growth or self awareness with your meditation, your journaling, all that self care comes into play. Then you can reevaluate and kind of change what your emotional regulation is from these attachment styles. And I also kind of wanted to, like I do each week, is relate these to everything that we talk about so that we can see how everything kind of intertwines. So I want to talk a little bit of how these correlate to the love languages, which again are words of affirmation, acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, and physical touch. I also want to show how these can come into a connection with violence and communication and how they might show up. Um, Again, some of these, as I said, tend to come out of some sort of traumatic interaction, whether it came from early childhood or it changed from one attachment style to another based on life events. So I'm going to kind of do one at a time. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in and let's jump in. So the secure attachment style, which some people may think that that is the one that we need to strive for. But again, that's going to be different for every single person based on your situations and where you are currently in your life. And if we're going to talk about this starting from when we were children, a secure attachment style would have developed if you had a stable, positive caregivers. Basically, you had a really good, there was no conflict, there was no trauma. You would tend to be more confident, easy to navigate your emotions and relationships, very good at expressing yourself. You are able to seek support and provide support. And someone with a secure attachment style would find it very easy to communicate whatever their love language is. And it would find it easy to understand what their partner's love language is so that they could give and receive in a very secure fashion. Pretty much less likely to use violence in communication. But again, humans, anyone's pushed far enough, they can be snotty, sarcastic, a little salty there. So secure attachment is the one that's going to be probably the least likely to have any type of kind of, you know, issues that could creep up. The next one is avoidant dismissive. Okay. So that, if it's going to come through from childhood, would probably be someone who had a very distant or unavailable caregiver. You know, s- their whoever their caregiver was just really wasn't there, kind of let them just go and do what they needed to do. So as these individuals grow, if they don't have any other life changes, or from when they come from being a child up and they still have this attachment style until they're old enough to be able to make changes, they would tend to have some sort of a dismissive attitude. Their emotions would be kind of closed off, and they really wouldn't have a close relationship with many people because they're dismissive of everybody. They tend to be more self-reliant and independent, very difficult expressing vulnerability, and they usually will try not to have too many deep emotional connections, because again, they that wasn't the modeling they had when they were a child. But again, this is something that you can work on with some counseling, some self-reflection, and you are able to then do all of that deep work and perhaps change that. And again, we'll say that with the next couple as well. Um, Again, if you came from one, if you came, perhaps you had some sort of a secure attachment when you were a child, but you had some sort of trauma or life event that came up, you can develop one of these other attachment styles. So it would look like putting up walls, trying to develop some sort of defense mechanism. And if you want to relate this to love languages, typically the avoidant dismissive attachment style would kind of be more inclined to want acts of service, and or physical touch. Okay, even though they're dismissive, they do seek a certain amount of closeness. And with the violence and communications component of this would look like someone who's very passive aggressive, or sarcasm is always there, they can be belittling. And this attachment style may be vulnerable, since we also do talk about dark personality traits and how they do affect trauma. And I'm not saying that dark personality traits come out of this, but they can play into this. So, someone who perhaps was raised in this type of environment and who can become a dark personality trait, they may be more vulnerable to it because of the situations that they've come to, and they can develop that as a child, because dark personality traits typically start from childhood and then they kind of blossom throughout a person's life. The next one I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about is fearful avoidant. Again, this would come from in early childhood, if we're going to start there again, from someone who perhaps had some sort of trauma, witnessed trauma. Their caregivers were really unpredictable. They never knew what was really going to happen. So they lived in a constant state of fear, and they just wanted to avoid everything. So they would kind of go and hide. And but at the same time, because they're small person, they wanted to have that closeness. So they have a lot of conflicting emotionals, fear of being close, but then pushing away. So there's a fear of betrayal, fear of rejection, because their caregiver could have been very unpredictable. So in with as a trauma response, it would kind of look like the push pull behavior, having some difficulty trusting people, very tough person to kind of express what their love languages are. And with the violence and communication, it's the whole roller coaster ride, right? So they would be, you know, right there and show some sort of an attachment, but then the fear comes up and they want to avoid everything, so then they would pull away. So it can be kind of confusing and a little distressing for um, the partner who may be in a relationship with somebody that has this type of an attachment style. And the last one I wanted to talk a little bit about is being anxious and preoccupied. And again, if this develops as a small person, it would be from a caregiver who was pretty inconsistent, wasn't there all the time, or was somebody that was, would kind of, if their caregiver perhaps was a dark personality trait, could have love bombed them, right? And then pulled it back and then gaslighted them. So an anxious, preoccupied attachment style is someone who's really going to crave closeness, but they fear abandonment. Okay, they tend to be clingy or controlling. Um, and again, this can show up. Any one of these past few that I talked about can show up as people get older. They could have started with one of these attachments, even the secure attachment, and some sort of trauma has come into play. So the other ones may have developed out of that. For the anxious preoccupied, this is someone who would need constant reassurance. They're hyper vigilant as to what's going on in their lives. They're always looking for danger, or they're looking like someone may reject them, and they may even have these ideas that things are going on that really aren't there because they're anxious all the time and they're just constantly afraid. um, and in their love language patterns, they may be drawn more to words of affirmation or quality time, again because they want that closeness. And their violence in communication may look more like being aggressive, may try to control, may try to manipulate, which those tendencies tend to fall into the dark personality traits. And again, this is another one that is pretty vulnerable to having, if it was someone who had this from a childhood on up, this is someone that may develop one of the dark personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy. So those are things that we can kind of look for. And, I can give you examples if you want of, you know, people who have secure relationships. I'm sure all of us either have someone in our life or know somebody have witnessed these attachment styles. And I don't know if people necessarily, when you meet somebody or whatever, that you're necessarily going to think in, let's label this as a specific attachment style. But if you think about these in your life, and actually if you go out and you can search on the internet, there are several different attachment style quizzes that you can take. There's a couple free ones and there's a couple where you got to sign up for things, whatever. And there'll be a bunch of questions that they'll ask you, and it'll give you your own scoring as to where you fall on your attachment styles. And going through those questions can maybe give you a little bit of insight into the other people that are in your life and how you can go, figure out what their attachment styles are. And yes, so somebody said that they went from secure to anxious and then back to secure, right? You had therapy and counseling with that. And with all of this, we talk about trauma all the time. We talk about ways to help get through all of that, whether it is with professional help, whether it's with some sort of a support group, coming here in the collective where you're with supportive, helpful individuals, whether it is your own doing your own work, the self reflection, the meditations, the journaling, all of that plays into being able to change your attachment styles. And again, if this is something that people, like I said, this is not something that a lot of people, at least I wasn't necessarily aware that it had a name, is I was going through life that, when you get into relationships, whether it be with your family or your friends or with some sort of close partner, you just put it under a general heading of I'm in a relationship or I have a friendship or whatever. You don't necessarily, at least I didn't personally, classify it as an attachment, right? So had I known about these back when I was younger, then maybe that would have helped in my healing journey. I could have found some support or done a little extra work on myself to get through those difficult times and to understand a little bit better how these attachment styles play into our trauma and our healing, because each of them will. Someone who is anxious and preoccupied, may not necessarily want to get help right away because they're anxious. They're afraid of being abandoned, so they're going to want to just continue to stay in some sort of situation. And the same thing with someone who is fearful and avoidant. If they don't understand that that is necessarily their attachment style, they're going to be, again, another style that is afraid to leave a situation that they're in. Let's see. So your attachment style can also correlate to what kind of a person, and it absolutely can correlate to the type of person that you're in a relationship with. And the styles that I said were vulnerable to becoming dark personalities tend to attract dark personalities, because the dark personality traits of the manipulation and all that, they can take advantage of these type of attachment styles because they're not secure. They have the fear, they have the anxiety, they have the avoidance. So dark personalities can manipulate that. So understanding your personal attachment style, again, we'll be doing some work and figuring out where that style came from, if it developed from when you were a child, or if it developed after some sort of significant life event, some sort of trauma, and going forward to see what you would like to do to see if you can change it to a more secure attachment style. And these aren't things with everything that we talk about. This, healing is a journey. It's not linear. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So give yourself some grace, give yourself some space, and understand that you're not alone in this. And none of these attachment styles I would ever say are a positive or a negative. They're all in, this is our lives. This is, we've come through all of these things, and this is what we have right now, and we know where we want to go, so we can work on changing the fearful avoidant into the secure. So I hope that gave everybody a little bit of an understanding and show a little bit more how things kind of weave together with our violence and communication, with our love languages, with the dark personality traits that show up in our lives, whether it be in work, whether it be in our personal lives. All of it is interconnected. And understanding each of the little components and maybe working on one at a time can help us through our journey. So I am going to have another little short one for you this weekend. And I hope, because as our summer is kind of winding down already, I can't believe that it's August. Um, I want everybody to go out and enjoy the weekend that they have coming up. So, again, everybody, it is a good day for a good day. And I look forward to seeing everybody next week. So, cheers.